In the year 1661, one man in France controlled more money than the king himself. His name was Nicolas Fouquet. Born in 1615 into a family of wealthy government officials, Fouquet clawed his way through the ruthless world of French politics from the age of 16. By the time he was 38, Cardinal Mazarin, the most powerful minister in France, had appointed him Superintendent of Finances. It was the single most powerful financial position in the entire kingdom. Fouquet didn't just manage the treasury, he became the treasury. He lent his own fortune to fund the state. He borrowed against his personal credit to keep France's wars going. His private wealth and the king's money became so tangled together that no one, not even Fouquet himself, could tell where one ended and the other began. He was charming, brilliant, generous to a fault. Poets adored him. Playwrights dedicated works to him. The finest minds of France orbited around him like planets around a sun. But there was a problem. France already had a son, and that son was watching. Louis XIV was only 22 years old, but he had already survived things that would break most men. As a child, he had lived through the Fronde, a series of brutal civil wars where nobles and mobs had threatened to tear the French monarchy apart. He had been forced to flee Paris in the dead of night. He had gone hungry. He had been humiliated. Those memories never left him. When Cardinal Mazarin finally died on March 9, 1661, everyone at court expected Louis to name a new chief minister. It was tradition. Kings ruled through powerful advisors. They always had. But Louis XIV stunned them all. He abolished the position entirely. "I shall be my own chief minister," he declared. He was done being managed, done being overshadowed. From this moment forward, every decision in France would flow through him and him alone. There was just one man who didn't seem to understand this: Nicolas Fouquet. Fouquet wasn't the only ambitious man circling the young king. Jean-Baptiste Colbert had served as Mazarin's personal secretary, a quiet, meticulous man who worked in the shadows while Fouquet dazzled in the spotlight. Where Fouquet was generous and extravagant, Colbert was calculating and patient, and Colbert wanted Fouquet destroyed. As early as 1659, Colbert had written a secret memo to Mazarin accusing Fouquet of embezzling more than half the taxes owed to the crown. The contents reached Louis. On his deathbed, Mazarin whispered to the young king, "Sire, I owe you everything, but I discharge my debt by presenting Colbert to you." It was a poisoned gift. From the moment Mazarin died, Colbert began feeding Louis a steady stream of damning reports about Fouquet's finances: irregularities, hidden accounts, suspicious wealth. The irony? Much of what Fouquet had done, he had done on Mazarin's orders, with the cardinal's full knowledge. But Mazarin was dead, and dead men don't defend their allies. Colbert's family emblem was the viper. Fouquet's was the squirrel with the motto, "Quo non ascende?" To what heights will he not climb? The viper was about to answer that question. In 1641, Fouquet had purchased a rundown manor about 50 kilometers southeast of Paris in a place called Vaux-le-Vicomte. Over the next 20 years, he poured a staggering fortune into transforming it into the most beautiful estate France had ever seen. He assembled a team of 3 artistic geniuses, men who had never worked together before. The architect Louis Laveau designed the chateau itself, crowned with an elegant dome that was revolutionary for its time. The painter Charles Lebrun filled the interiors with breathtaking murals, gilded woodwork, and painted ceilings depicting mythological scenes. And the landscape architect André Lenotre created gardens of such mathematical perfection, with fountains, canals, terraces, and sculpted hedges, that they would later become the blueprint for Versailles itself. No private estate in France had ever come close to this. The symmetry, the scale, the beauty. It was more magnificent than anything the King of France owned, and that was the problem Fouquet could not see. By the spring of 1661, Fouquet sensed trouble. The king had abolished the chief minister position, a role Fouquet had expected to inherit. Colbert's influence was growing. Whispers circulated at court that the superintendent's days were numbered. Fouquet was no fool. He had survived decades of French court politics. He knew the signs, but instead of retreating, he made a decision that would seal his fate. He would throw a party, not just any party, the most spectacular celebration France had ever witnessed. He would invite the young king to Vaux-le-Vicomte, dazzle him with beauty and generosity, and remind Louis just how indispensable Nicolas Fouquet truly was. The ostensible purpose was to celebrate the completion of the chateau, but the real purpose was survival. Fouquet began planning obsessively. He hired the playwright Molière to write a brand new comedy for the occasion. He commissioned original music. He ordered exotic foods from across the Orient. He arranged fireworks on a scale never before attempted. 6,000 invitations were sent out, not just across France, but across Europe. What Fouquet did not know was this: the king had already decided his fate. Louis and Colbert had been secretly plotting his arrest since May. The party wasn't going to save Fouquet. It was going to be his last night of freedom, the evening of August 17th, 1661. A warm summer night. The moon hangs low over the French countryside. At 6 o'clock in the evening, the royal carriage rolled through the iron gates of Vaux-le-Vicomte. Louis XIV arrived with his mother, Queen Anne of Austria, and roughly 600 members of the court. His wife, Queen Marie-Thérèse, was pregnant and could not attend. But Louise's young mistress, Louise de la Vallière, was at his side. One notable absence: Jean-Baptiste Colbert. He stayed away, deliberately distancing himself from the man he was about to destroy. Fouquet greeted the king at the entrance with deep bows and warm smiles. He was the perfect host, gracious, charming, attentive. As Louis stepped through the doors and into the grand entrance hall, his eyes swept across the painted ceilings, the gilded walls, the sheer scale of beauty that surrounded him. Voltaire would later capture this moment in a single devastating sentence. At 6 in the evening, Fouquet was the king of France. By 2 in the morning, he was nothing. The first course alone would have bankrupted most nobles. François Vatel, the most celebrated chef in all of France, personally supervised the banquet. He commanded an army of kitchen staff preparing dishes that many of the guests had never seen before. The meal was served on gold and silver plates. Exotic delicacies imported from the Orient sat alongside French cuisine crafted specifically for the occasion. Pheasant, quail, partridge, ortolans, veal, elaborate bisques and ragouts. An orchestra of 24 musicians, led by the composer Jean-Baptiste Lully, serenaded the diners with music written exclusively for this single evening. Fouquet and his wife moved from table to table, personally attending to their guests with a warmth that contemporaries described as extraordinary. The poet Jean de La Fontaine, who was there that night, later wrote that the food was outstanding, but the graciousness of the host was even more remarkable. For Louis, sitting at the head of it all, each golden plate was a humiliation. Each exotic dish was a reminder. Each note of music whispered the same unbearable truth. His finance minister lived better than the King of France. After the feast, Fouquet personally escorted the king through the gardens. Nothing like this existed anywhere in France. André Lenôtre had created a landscape of almost supernatural perfection. The paths were laid out in precise geometric patterns. Fountains erupted at perfectly timed intervals. Pools and canals stretched toward the horizon, creating optical illusions that made the gardens appear to extend into infinity. Sculpted hedges, terraces, grottos, and hundreds of statues lined the walkways. The air was thick with the scent of flowers arranged in intricate patterns called parterres de broderie, embroidered gardens. The scale was staggering. The central axis of the garden ran for over 2 kilometers. As the king walked deeper into this paradise, he was seeing the future, because everything here, every fountain, every perspective, every geometric trick would later be replicated at Versailles using the exact same team of architects and designers. Louis was being shown his own dream, built by another man, with another man's money, and the evening was far from over. As night fell, the guests were led to an outdoor theater constructed deep within the gardens. Torches and lanterns illuminated a stage set among towering trees, with fountains visible in the background. Here, Molière premiered his brand new comedy, Les Fâcheux, The Boors. It was a play about a man constantly interrupted by annoying, self-important people, a satire that had the audience roaring with laughter. Molière himself performed the lead role. It was, in fact, the very first comédie ballet ever staged, a revolutionary new art form that blended theater, music, and dance into a single performance. Between the scenes, the composer Lully's dancers performed choreographed interludes. During intermissions, performers dressed as forest sprites emerged from behind the hedges, offering sweets and jewels to the ladies of the court. The king reportedly enjoyed the play. Some accounts say it was the only part of the evening he genuinely liked. He even suggested a new character to Molière, a hunting boar, which the playwright added to the very next performance just 8 days later. But a king can laugh and still be furious, and the spectacle was about to reach its climax. Then came the fireworks. Nothing like it had ever been seen in France. The display began with sweeping arcs of light that illuminated the entire garden from end to end. Massive fleurs-de-lis, the symbol of French royalty, blazed across the sky in showers of sparks. Down below, on the Grand Canal, a life-sized mechanical whale glided slowly across the water, packed with firecrackers and smoke bombs, erupting in a mock naval battle that sent plumes of fire and color reflecting across the surface. As the royal party turned back toward the chateau, a second barrage of fireworks erupted, this time launched directly from the great dome of Vaux-le-Vicomte itself, showering the sky above the building in gold and silver. The noise was so tremendous that 2 horses from the Queen Mother's carriage panicked, broke free, and drowned in the chateau's moat. The festivities raged past midnight and into the early hours. Some accounts mention a torchlit indoor hunt through the apartments, using cork bullets, and a lottery where every single ticket was a winner, the prizes being diamonds, pearls, fine weapons, and thoroughbred horses. It was 2 o'clock in the morning before the last guest departed. Every person there agreed. It was the most extraordinary night they had ever experienced. Fouquet believed he had triumphed. He had never been more wrong. According to the historian François Bluche, Louis XIV returned to his chateau at Fontainebleau that night with a face like thunder. Some accounts say he wanted to arrest Fouquet on the spot, right there at the party. But his mother, Anne of Austria, reportedly talked him out of it, arguing that it would violate the sacred laws of hospitality to arrest a man in his own home. Louis relented, but only temporarily. The truth is, the king's rage wasn't born that night. It had been building for months. Colbert had been poisoning Louis against Fouquet since Mazarin's death. The plot to arrest Fouquet was already in motion well before August 17th, but the party at Vaux-le-Vicomte did something far worse than merely offend the king. It confirmed everything Colbert had been whispering. How could a finance minister afford all of this? The gold plates, the exotic food, the fireworks, the chateau itself, grander than anything the crown possessed, the gardens that put every royal residence to shame. Either Fouquet had stolen from the state, or he was simply more powerful than the king. Both possibilities were intolerable. Louis looked at the splendor of Vaux-le-Vicomte and saw not a tribute, but a threat. Louis moved carefully. He was only 22, but he had learned patience from watching Mazarin. He did not strike immediately. Instead, he made Fouquet feel safe. In the weeks following the party, the king gave no outward sign of his fury. He was pleasant. He was cordial. He even persuaded Fouquet to resign his position as Procureur General of the Parlement of Paris, a title that had given Fouquet legal immunity from prosecution by anyone except the Parlement itself. Fouquet, still believing he could win the king's favor, agreed. He had just surrendered his last shield. Then Louis announced he was traveling to Nantes for the opening session of the Provincial Estates of Brittany. He required all his ministers to accompany him, including Fouquet. Fouquet went willingly. He believed the king valued his presence. He had no idea he was walking into an ambush. Louis had given secret orders to one man, Charles de Batz-Castelmore d'Artagnan, lieutenant of the king's musketeers. Yes, the real D'Artagnan. The man who would later inspire Alexandre Dumas' legendary novel. D'Artagnan had his instructions. All he needed was the signal. September 5th, 1661, Nantes, France. Nicolas Fouquet walked out of the council chamber that morning in excellent spirits. The king had been warm to him. He felt certain he was still in royal favor. Then D'Artagnan stepped forward. "Monsieur, I arrest you by order of the king." Fouquet was stunned. By all accounts, the arrest caught him completely by surprise. He had genuinely believed, right up to that very moment, that he was safe. D'Artagnan's musketeers surrounded him. He was not permitted to speak to anyone. He was not permitted to write a single letter. Everything was confiscated: his papers, his documents, his correspondence. Colbert had planned every detail. His agents simultaneously raided Fouquet's properties across France, seizing financial records, personal letters, and anything that could be used against him. The Superintendent of Finances, the man who had controlled more wealth than the king, was placed in a carriage under armed guard and taken first to the Château d'Angers. The news spread across France like wildfire. The squirrel had been caught. What followed was one of the most controversial trials in French history. It lasted nearly 3 years. Fouquet was charged with embezzlement of state funds and, most seriously, with treason, conspiring against the crown. The charges were brought before a special tribunal called a Chambre de Justice, handpicked by Colbert himself. The deck was stacked against Fouquet from the start. The investigators reported directly to Colbert, Fouquet's sworn enemy. Key documents that would have proven Mazarin's involvement in the same financial dealings were conveniently suppressed. But Fouquet fought back. Despite being isolated, denied proper legal counsel, and subjected to immense psychological pressure, Fouquet defended himself with extraordinary skill. He was, after all, a trained lawyer, and a brilliant one. He dismantled the prosecution's arguments point by point. He exposed procedural violations. He turned public opinion in his favor. Writers and intellectuals rallied to his cause. Madame de Sévigné followed the trial obsessively in her famous letters. La Fontaine wrote poems defending him, calling him a phoenix destroyed by a jealous king, words that cost La Fontaine his royal pension. The trial became the most closely watched legal proceeding in France. On December 20th, 1664, the verdict came. Of the 22 judges, 13 voted for banishment, 9 voted for death. Fouquet had escaped execution. Under the court's ruling, he would be exiled from France and his property confiscated. It was harsh, but it was survivable. He would live. He could start over. But Louis XIV was not satisfied. In an extraordinary act that shocked even his own court, the king overruled the judges. He took the sentence of banishment, which was supposed to be a mercy, and commuted it upward to life imprisonment. No possibility of pardon, no possibility of appeal. It was a message to every powerful person in France. The king's will was absolute. The law served him, not the other way around. Louis also launched a vendetta against Fouquet's friends, supporters, and family. Those who had stood by Fouquet during the trial were punished. Their loyalty was treated as disloyalty to the crown. Fouquet was to be erased. In December 1664, Nicolas Fouquet was transported under heavy guard to the fortress of Pignerol, a remote prison high in the Alps in what is now northern Italy. His jailer was a man named Benigne d'Auvergne de Saint-Mars, a strict and unforgiving prison governor who would guard Fouquet for the next 15 years. The conditions were brutal. Fouquet was confined to 2 small rooms in the dungeon. His servants were taken away. He was forbidden from communicating with anyone. His wife was not permitted to write to him until 1672, 8 years into his imprisonment. She was allowed to visit him only once, in 1679, just months before his death. Yet Fouquet endured. In the solitude of his cell, the former finance minister, the man who had hosted the most lavish party in French history, spent his days writing. He composed translations. He wrote devotional texts. He bore his imprisonment with a dignity that even his enemies acknowledged. The fortress of Pignerol would later become infamous for another reason. It was here that the mysterious man in the iron mask was also imprisoned, a figure whose identity has been debated for centuries, and who became forever linked to Fouquet's tragic story. With Fouquet locked away, Louis XIV did something breathtaking in its ruthlessness. He looted Vaux-le-Vicomte. Royal agents descended on the chateau and stripped it of its finest treasures: furniture, tapestries, paintings, statues, silverware, and books. Even the orange trees from the gardens were uprooted and carted away. Everything was distributed among the king's own residences. But Louis didn't just steal Fouquet's possessions. He stole his vision. He hired Fouquet's entire creative team, Levaux, Lebrun, and Lenôtre, the very architects and artists who had made Vaux-le-Vicomte a masterpiece. He put them to work on a new project, transforming his father's modest hunting lodge at Versailles into the greatest palace the world had ever seen. Every innovation at Vaux-le-Vicomte, the formal gardens, the fountains, the geometric perspectives, the grand interiors, became the foundation of Versailles. The Palace of Versailles, the supreme symbol of French royal power for the next century, was born from the ruins of Nicolas Fouquet's dream. Louis didn't just destroy Fouquet, he consumed him. For 15 years, Nicolas Fouquet sat in his cell at Pignerol. The world moved on without him. Louis XIV consolidated absolute power over France. Versailles rose from the earth. Colbert became the king's chief financial minister, reshaping French economic policy for decades. France entered its golden age, an age built partly on the ruins of the man rotting in an Alpine prison. By 1680, Fouquet's health had deteriorated badly. He was 65 years old and suffering from a long, unnamed illness. Ironically, there were signs that the king was finally preparing to show clemency. Reports suggest that Fouquet was about to receive permission to travel to the town of Bourbon to take the healing waters there, a first step, many believed, toward an eventual release. But it was too late. On March 23, 1680, Nicolas Fouquet died at Pignerol. His son, the Count of Vaux, was at his bedside. The official cause of death was apoplexy, a stroke. No death certificate was issued. He was buried quietly in a local church. A year later, his remains were moved to the family crypt in Paris in an unmarked grave. The man who had once been the most powerful financier in France disappeared from history almost without a trace. Today, the Château de Vaux-le-Vicomte still stands, about an hour southeast of Paris. It survived over 350 years of European upheaval virtually intact. Fouquet's wife managed to reclaim the property in 1673, though her husband never saw it again. The estate eventually passed through different hands and is still privately owned today by descendants who have restored it to its original glory. On summer evenings, Vaux-le-Vicomte is lit by thousands of candles, recreating in a small way the atmosphere of that fateful night in August 1661. Meanwhile, Versailles, the palace that was born from Fouquet's vision and built by Fouquet's artists, became the seat of French royal power until the Revolution. It remains one of the most visited landmarks on earth. Every fountain at Versailles owes a debt to Vaux-le-Vicomte. Every sculpted hedge, every geometric perspective, every gilded ceiling. Louis XIV erased Fouquet from history, but he could not erase what Fouquet had created. He could only steal it, expand it, and stamp his own name on it. The squirrel's motto asked, "To what heights will he not climb?" The answer, it turned out, was the height from which he would fall. Nicolas Fouquet made a mistake that has destroyed powerful people throughout all of human history. He outshone his master. It didn't matter that the party was meant as a tribute. It didn't matter that Fouquet intended to honor the king. What mattered was how it made Louis feel. Fouquet's brilliance, his wealth, his taste, his connections, everything that should have made him indispensable, instead made him a threat. He made the most powerful man in France feel small. And powerful men who feel small become dangerous. The lesson is timeless. It applies in boardrooms and battlefields, in politics and partnerships, in every arena where power is at stake. Never make those above you feel inferior. Never display your talents so freely that those in power begin to fear you rather than value you. Make your masters appear more brilliant than they are, and you will rise. Outshine them, and you will be destroyed. Louis XIV went on to rule France for another 54 years, the longest reign in European history. He became the most powerful monarch of his age. Nicolas Fouquet died alone in a mountain prison, forgotten by the world. One party, One night, one fatal miscalculation, and everything was lost.